behind the scenes, it was a small group of people that were doing everything.
Welcome back to the GTM podcast. It's your host, Scott Barker.
I want to know how this insane growth actually happened.
Hello and welcome back, everyone, to the GTM podcast. Scott Barker here, your host. And I wanted to quickly just thank all of our listeners. It's been really cool to watch some of our analytics these days. And there is a lot of you. So we appreciate the support every week and appreciate you taking the time to level up and really care about your career and the companies you're a part of or the companies you're founding. We certainly do our best to try and bring on the best guests that we can find, best operators, founders, VCs who have really seen the journey, done the thing, gone from zero to IPO, sometimes many times. And this next guest may have one of the more decorated marketing careers I've certainly ever seen, and super lucky to have her on the podcast. I'm joined by Katrina Wong. Katrina, welcome.
Thank you, Scott. Thanks for having me. What a beautiful intro. I appreciate the compliments. It's great to be here and looking forward to our conversation.
Absolutely. Lots to cover. So we'll dive right in. And this has been a long time coming. We actually were going to do this one in 2023. As everyone knows, 2023 was madness for a lot of folks. So I'm super excited we're getting this time together. But quickly, for the listeners, I always like to tee up just a little bit of a background. So Katrina Wong is the Divisional CMO and VP of Marketing at Twilio Segment, obviously an incredible company. And she has a proven track record for launching products in new markets specifically and helping companies move up to the enterprise. I know for a lot of people listening, that is probably one of your goals for this year, at least in a lot of the startups we talk to. Everyone's trying to go up market, obviously SMB, smaller companies. There's risk when the market's the way it is. But Katrina has also created award-winning integrated campaigns through data storytelling. It's kind of a common theme. And prior to Twilio, Katrina worked at Zuora, Salesforce, and SAP. And before that, she started her career as a management consultant for PricewaterhouseCoopers. And that takes her to 15 years of marketing experience and is just incredibly passionate about helping companies through stages of really hyper growth or substantial growth, including, and this is crazy, helping 6 companies exit successfully, which is wild. And I want to spend a lot of time talking about that, but that is rare. Do you ever look back and see the career you've had, and do you ever take time to what is it? Look at the clouds from the mountaintop kind of kind of thing?
I feel like I barely have time to do so, but when I do have a minute, sometimes it's in between startups exiting, that type of thing. Um, it's exactly what Steve Jobs, shared quite a few years ago, where he was like, "Look, your career and what you do may not make sense at the moment, but when you look back, the dots actually do connect." And I feel like that resonates with me a ton. Having started my career in consulting, it was about going into different industries, solving different problems. So I've always liked the variety of work that's possible when you choose technology as a career. So I've done, very different startups, have sold and marketed to different industries and different personas. I like that a lot. But what you learn from each experience does build, and you can use that a ton as you progress to your next venture.
Yeah, yeah. I've witnessed the same thing throughout my career of like jumping into roles that don't seem to be related, but then when you look back, like, oh no, that all helped me get to this point I'm at today. So the first question I wanted to ask you, and this is somewhat of a self-serving question, is being on the VC side of the house now. We're trying to pick winners every day, great companies, great founders. 6 successful exits is an insane track record. What's the secret? How did you pick these winners?
I'm not sure that there's actually any magic to it, but what I typically do is I gravitate towards technologies, solutions, right? A problem statement that's large enough. And then I look at, is that relevant for, what we need? And if you're B2B, as a business leader myself, is this relevant enough to the business that I'm running? The next thing I kind of look at is the management team. And I don't mean just their resumes and, their experience, but how is that decision making? Are they intentional with creating a culture and it's being operational front and center? Um, and then usually I also look at, is that being pulled through to the rest of the company? Um, Another thing that I pay attention to, and especially in a down market, is the mindset of learning and how agile the leaders are. Are they close to their customers? Are they learning from the market? Are they adjusting? Um, and the last thing I'll say is, you know, some of it is just luck, and I feel very grateful. And let's just say you don't quite pick a winner. I bet you're still going to be learning a lot, and that is still tremendous for your career.
Mhm. Yeah, I love that. I'm sad to know there's no secret sauce that I can just duplicate from here on out. But I love all that mindset of learning. An operational mindset, bias towards action. Understanding the decision making process is huge for any successful company. Um, when you look back now, you're part of these teams, so you picked well. What were some of the commonalities you've observed once you were actually in the building that contributed to their successes? And then maybe I'll add to that. Second part is, how do you think startups could maybe apply those learnings from day one?
Yes. I think when you are, and I've worked with so many founders, either reporting into them or these days, I do a fair amount of advisory work. And I think it's really easy when you are starting a new business and sometimes it's bleeding edge technology. You tend to think about the why a ton. Why am I doing this? What's my strategy? So on and so forth. And there's almost this false trade off that happens. Getting operational and executing feels like less fun, and it may at times feel less important, right? And I think what if I were to, reflect back, the commonalities of all of these startups that have exited, some are IPOs and some are, very meaningful exits. It's boils down to the ability to execute, right? And what that means is, how do you actually operate day to day, right? So things like, what are your cadences, right? How do you actually measure results? Because at the end of the day, you really can't improve anything unless you measure it. Um, um, I love working with sales orgs because you kind of know when you're coming in each week, where you think you're going to land with your sales, right? That's the metric of success. What adjustments do you need to make? And what I've done in my career is bring that operational mindset to marketing. And we do the same. We do weekly demand gen sprints. And guess what? The best laid plans, don't always work out. So we're behind. Then what do you do to catch up? And all of this may sound so obvious, but oftentimes, um, if you've not started, operating with a lot of rigor, you probably don't realize that you have to build your cadences to be more frequent and to look at your business in a greater detail than you may imagine.
First off, I love this idea of marketing sprints. I think sometimes in some organizations, marketing can get bogged down from over analysis or overly strategic thinking. Maybe, you know, the typical just too many meetings about meetings, and you're trying to figure out position messaging, and all these things are so important that sometimes just like going out there, being comfortable with trial and error, um, is kind of left to the wayside. So I love that you've infused that in the teams that you're a part of. How do you balance that? Like naturally, as you've climbed in your career, C-suite VP level positions, you're pulled into these more strategic discussions, and of course that matters. But you need to find ways to still get your hands dirty and make sure that your team is comfortable getting their hands dirty and executing at a fast pace. How do you find that balance?
Yes, that balance and what you just hit on is what makes good great, right? And I've seen this happen at a lot of, I would say, later stage, growth stage, Series D, about to exit. Um, and even when COVID first hit, all of us were locked in a room. We're like, oh, we need a new message for the market. We need something new. And you can see potentially, right, the trade offs of, oh, we're going to spend a few days, few weeks, figuring out the messages and then putting it out in the market, be a beautiful campaign. Um, when I say agility, I actually mean it. I mean, you don't want to overtest and overanalyze, but at the time there were no answers, right? It's all hypotheses. And so I like to do 20% of the work, test it, get some feedback, and then build it out. Uh, it's not too different from how product teams do it, right? Figure out your MVP. But I'm certainly more in the camp of let's move fast, So for us, it was really doing some really quick research, talking to a few customers. It's the obvious stuff. But these days, we are all so lucky because you can get some top level messages, test it out just with even paid ads, or with an email or two. That way you're not, you know, uh, you don't go down a path where you spend 8 weeks building a beautiful campaign, all to know that, hey, maybe that didn't resonate.
Yeah. That was a great nugget. I like that one. Do 20% of the work, test it with the market, and then go and do the 80%. I think a lot of teams I've been a part of, you go and you make your best decision, you use all the data, but then you go all in, and then it might flop, and you've just wasted, a lot of time, a lot of resources. In the model that you described, you could essentially run 5 tests with the same amount of effort and then double down on the one that works, and it's gonna be, that much more effective. Yeah, I like it. Um, so going back to kind of the role of marketing, and what did you see the role of marketing play in, preparing a company for a successful exit? And, maybe even sharing an example of how one of the strategic marketing initiatives that you stood up directly impacted kind of the exit process.
Yeah, I actually have two examples here. Marketing is huge in that uh, it is usually through marketing that your potential buyers understand who you are, their perceptions of you, so on and so forth. So a few years ago, I was at a company and I was basically hired. Upfront, I knew because, they were ready to exit. And my immediate task as a VP of marketing was, and our strategy was, um, how do we build some immediate awareness? There was some awareness. How do we up level that? How do we actually force some initial pipeline? Because, when you get acquired, they're actually assessing, your value based on the health of the business. So it does actually start with marketing. Is there even pipeline to be closed? Right. And then there's a very human piece of it. Who are the founders? What is that origin story? And so I was also tasked to kind of build buzz around that. we thought it would take about 8 months to exit, and we ended up exiting in about 5 months. So, I basically went through all these motions, took the company through that. And when we were speaking to buyers, you can see them recognizing these elements. It was quite rewarding and a ton of fun. Um, for Segment, which was also an amazing experience, one of the things that we needed to get very clear on, and this was like a little bit before the acquisition, was um, with a lot of API first, platform first, developer first products, they're so flexible, and it's pretty amazing to see what your community can do with your product. Um, but for us, it was about getting very clear on our ICP and the segmentation. So when I walked in as Series D company, we pretty much sold to every single industry possible. You know, in Salesforce, also a very flexible system. We had something like 256 industries, and we had deals, everywhere. And as you scale as a larger startup, it's important to figure out for your product strategy where you want to double down on. And so here was, a problem where we were like, well, looking at the data, we could pretty much do everything. What should we do? So, what one of my first initiatives was to actually work with PricewaterhouseCoopers to do a pretty extensive data driven segmentation project. And with that, and this is where, if you have the funds to do so, and perhaps, somewhere in, uh, the management team's thinking was potentially an exit, you invest. And we did probably around thousands and thousands of surveys with companies that were ready to buy a data management solution to kind of understand, the compelling need, the compelling event, the problem they were looking to solve. And then we were able to take those inputs and make decisions about ICP, therefore refine the product strategy, the roadmap, eventually pricing and packaging. And all of this, by the time we got to the point of, due diligence, it was solid. We weren't operating just off of, you know, the management team's hypothesis and what our customers are saying. All of that is very important. It starts there, but we knew what the market needed, right? These are the types of larger orchestrations that drive up your valuation. Like, we understood the market and we could back it up by data. Yeah, that was an amazing experience as well.
Yeah, that's big, and I feel like those are the initiatives that makes marketing have an impact across, the entire organization. You're not just, contributing to revenue, you are directly contributing to how product is being built, pricing and package, all of these things influence the entire, org, and that's what's gonna, drive up the acquisition price or make it more compelling. And then, another thing you said that I think will resonate with a lot of the marketers on that are listening is this idea that, I think every marketer wants, a big total addressable market. That sounds great. Look at all these people I can market to. We can do so many cool things. But in reality, that can also be sort of the kiss of death. Because if you're everything to everyone, it's hard to find that identity. People don't know, when to think of segment in this case. And so you need to be really intentional with, this is who we're built for, and this is who we are today. And that may evolve in the future. But like that focus must have been really huge for you and your team.
That's right. That's right. And, once you have a decision, then, I talked earlier about operational skills, the, kind of execution excellence, but then you're aligned, and it's so much easier to execute. Because part of why it's hard to execute and get results quickly is that misalignment of who you want to sell to, who you want to market to, what is your product um, built for. So that helped us execute really nicely too. And it was very evident year one after the acquisition, we were still growing at a clip, you know, a lot, very quickly. One of the fastest growing businesses post acquisition. It was nice to see.
The last question I had for you on that was, and this might be a hard question, but so you did this big analysis. You brought in, outside help, PricewaterhouseCoopers. Startups, smaller companies maybe don't have the luxury to do so. I know you advise, invest, in a lot of, startups. Is there a way to get halfway there yourself? And how would you advise companies, founders to get the similar result that you did, which was narrowing down your ICP, finding the right personas, finding the right markets to be in, without maybe spending what I imagine was a pretty hefty bill at Pricewater.
Absolutely. Wonderful question. I do get asked this a lot. So here is how I would do it without the outside consultants and if I were a smaller business. Look at your top, X number of deals. If you have 20, 20, 25, if you're a little larger, your top 100 deals, right? And start looking at patterns, right? And figure out like what your highest deals are, right? And then look at um, who you're selling to, what use cases are, and start looking for patterns. And here's what's nuanced. Look at ease of if your product requires implementation, ease of implementation, because just because somebody gives you a lot of money doesn't mean that you should be selling to them, right? It has to be that fit. So, how easy is it to get to your top accounts of the highest value, right? And so, I've also seen startups kind of sell to one or two enterprise customer, and they're like, okay, that's our ICP because they're willing to buy our product. But then look, it was so hard for them to get it there, and then also the product then needs to move in a direction that goes really deep. So, I love working with startups. I love working with technology because it's a little puzzle that you kind of have to figure out. But yes, my recommendations are look at your top 20 deals, right? Your highest grossing deals. Look at which ones are the easiest to both close and implement and retain, and that should be the basis for your ICP, kind of in the early years.
Fantastic advice, and an exercise anyone can do on this call. I'm hearing like highest value, lowest friction is kind of what it's all about. That's what you're kind of for. Yeah. Beautiful. So I do want to reserve some time to talk through some stories. This is kind of a story based podcast. People love hearing kind of the nitty gritty of how things actually happened. And I know sometimes the work that we do, as we talked about when we're doing it, we don't know the impact it's going to have. But now with some hindsight and kind of delayed feedback. I know that you implemented a really interesting program back in your Salesforce days. And I would love to bring you back. We'll jump in a time machine. We'll bring you back to the Salesforce days. And for the listeners, I would love for you to just walk through where you were at and what program you implemented and kind of the results of that.
Yes. So, yes, we are taking the time machine back. This is quite some time ago. So imagine Salesforce, me joining, and we were about a month out from the IPO. So they were, that growth stage startup many, many years ago. And, uh, you know, at that time, business was exploding and we literally could not service all the customers coming in. And we couldn't hire enough. We couldn't hire quickly. These were early years of just the cloud and SaaS. And so we couldn't train folks fast enough. Um, and at the time, um, the best and the brightest uh, college students, I guess no different from now, kind of flock to the valley and you're looking for, work. Um, and At the time, there was less vehicles to be a founder and to create new technology. So a lot of companies ended up hiring entry level college students from the best universities, and they're either SCRs or customer support. And so at Salesforce, just really getting familiar with the product and knowing and how it works. I mean, they still do employee certifications; it's a requirement. So starting at customer support was kind of the route if you didn't have any work experience. So what my manager and I saw were, the best performing customer support reps across all measurements were doing so well. We're like, okay, they could probably, and they knew the product well, they could probably make great professional services team members that would implement the solution. And then we saw in the data a really interesting correlation. Even though they were doing so well, they were not doing well at all. And in fact, to the point where they weren't really successful on any implementations, and we couldn't tell why. And like most companies and well-run businesses, right? You end up having to put employees on PIP programs, and my manager at the time was like, Katrina, you're really good at training folks and really getting these unlocks. What if we did this? What if we took everyone in a PIP program, we put them through a training program that we create and see if we can actually get them successful? And we had no idea, was it really the soft skills? It can't be the technical skills. Was it onboarding? And you can imagine, like when most companies, when you go public, right? Like it's just, it was just so hard to focus on, even that, right? And again, the operational, right, chops. I ended up taking a program that, I uh, was a part of from my consulting days. And we put the folks through, and it was about 100 in my program. It was about 100 folks that were on PIPs, and everyone graduated, had raving reviews from our customers. Um, and it was an intense time, I will say, back then. And I still, I mean, for years, for like 10, 12 years, we get thank you notes from folks that went through the program and were like, oh my gosh, that early career unlock for me meant the world. And I'm now making 300K, and this is like 10 years ago, so that's a lot of money. 300K, and I never thought I could get there. And I was about to be managed out by one of the greatest software companies in the world. And that really cemented my thinking as a leader. And because I started in consulting, I've always taken this very like servant leadership approach. I probably am an extreme when it comes to an executive. Um, on in organizations I lead, and now they're of much larger size, we rarely do PIPs at all because I believe that if you, as a leader, it is our responsibility. I believe that you can pretty much set up everyone for success if the willingness is there on the other end. And what I want to challenge here in the Valley is this notion of firing fast, because every time you do a rehire, you're restarting again. So I see a lot of very flippant, oh, fire fast, fire fast. And I'm like, wait a second, as leaders, have we done our job to actually set folks up for success? How is our training? And it's not just onboarding, right? And and the counter argument is, well, Katrina, that might take a lot of time. And I was like, sure, but I bet you putting a rec up again and rehiring will take more time. So I've actually, like, my experience has been, get it going with the good team that you've hired. ensure that you have great hiring practices so you're starting with something good, you will get faster and better execution if you're not constantly restarting. That's been a huge that's a huge one for me, you know, in terms of learnings and observations in my career.
And what a fantastic story, and thanks for breaking that down. There's a lot of things in there that I kind of want to unpack, and one is just like kudos to Salesforce. There's a reason Salesforce is Salesforce. I think it's a Mark Benioff quote where he says, "Speed is the currency of business," and you at that time were moving so fast, and a a lot of companies in that position would have said, "Okay, let's fire them, bring in new talent that allow us to go faster." And having this mentality of kind of like slowing down to speed up, which you had, and it was probably a massive task to go create this whole training program, put people through it, and there required some patience. But I think another thing that does is not only are you fixing the problem, which it sounds like almost everyone you turned around, but the amount of loyalty you're breeding from those employees, everyone remembers the people that are there when times get tough. Like, it's easy to be there when everything's rocking. But I imagine if you also looked at the tenure of those 100 people you put through that, I bet it's much higher than average as well.
That's right. That's right. That's right. Almost everyone stayed for years and years and years. Yeah.
So big, and your idea of challenging, fire fast. I've thought about that one for a long time. It's a balance. There, of course, is people that need to be moved out of an organization, but what's interesting is personally, we just hired a VP of talent, and so we're
All
working,
that.
yeah, working
Congrats.
like even more closely. Thank you, with our portfolio companies as we always had, and helping them with hires and helping them with executive hires. And so I'm starting to learn more about just like recruiting and executive recruiting and things as well, because we're hearing these stories, and not only are you wasting time and money on their salary and training them and opportunity costs, but a lot of these hires too are very expensive. People are spending a lot of money to get these people on board, whether you're using a recruiting agency or just like marketing a lot. I don't know if there's been a comprehensive study of like what it actually costs to turn over a tech employee, but it's so much more than we think.
That's right. That's right. That's right. Beautifully said. So it's almost like once you hire somebody, it's kind of your job as a hiring manager to set them up for success. I mean, maybe we'll go there just for one sec since you raised it with, executives. This is close and dear to my heart. As an executive myself working at startups, I think what's key for an executive, to be successful, and actually prove out their own ROI, meaning, to your point, you pay a lot to hire executives through recruiters. Maybe one day that dynamic will change. Um, and then, for them to really make it worthwhile that you've spent that much, right? It's a big part of whether an executive is successful or not is how the entire executive team works together. And I think just that being the core team is an important concept. One of my favorite books about team dynamics, kind of executive leadership, the five dysfunctions of a team. And it actually talks about when executives are managing, it's not just about wearing your department hat, right? Like your number one team is, as a marketer, my number one team is usually the CEO that I support into, the head of product, the head of sales. Like we are one team. And then our teams that we manage, um, you know, help drive strategy, but really execute on the alignment that happens up at the top.
I haven't read that one, but I've made a note of it. Five dysfunctions of a team. We'll put that in the show notes. And yeah, super important. Of how did you find too? And this is a bit off side uh, a sidebar, but my brain goes strange places, so we're gonna rock with it. How did you find in these big organizations you've been a part of? So you mentioned this idea of there's like one team, that you're all one cohesive team, of course, but then you almost have to build your own identity on your own marketing team. And then even in the marketing team, there's maybe like sub teams. Do you try and get everyone identifying as the same team, or have you kind of given identity to sub teams within that team? And do you think that's important?
I think always having an identity, sense of belonging is important because, especially within marketing, you have so many different sub functions and your jobs, are a little different. Product marketing from integrated campaigns, so on and so forth. But I think it is important to feel cohesive as a larger marketing team versus, you know, almost like too much competition within the teams, right? Because another core, I guess, um, principle, nothing new, uh, for me in marketing is this concept of integrated marketing or integrated campaigns, which means, right, like, um, the sum of all your efforts are gonna be so much greater than a single effort, right? You know, that done right, you're gonna get the, 2 plus 3 equals, 20 effect. And you see this in marketing a lot where, you have, um, email marketing just, blasting your database. And then randomly you'll see a webinar, and then maybe there's a product launch, and integrating all of those tactics so that your campaign makes sense and you're taking your audience through a journey and you're telling a story through your campaigns is what I can totally talk, ad nauseum about. But that's what it's about. And as humans, we will respond better to that, right? So when you look at how you operate, right? It's okay for the many small little teams to have their identity, but they also understand how working together will achieve better results and better business results. And it's oftentimes way more fulfilling.
Yeah. Yeah. And I imagine that is no easy task at some of the larger organizations you've been a
It's
part
no
of,
easy
but
task.
there's no excuse for any of the startups or smarter or smaller companies listening to this to not be fully integrated throughout your marketing organization, because it'll only get harder. So start nailing it now. Um, I want to quickly go to a listener question. So we love when listeners send in questions. You can send your questions to questions@gtmfund.com, and we will answer them on future episodes. This one's great, and I think I teased it out for a reason because I think you'll have a great point of view on it. The question was, the company I work for is getting acquired. What are some things I can do to set myself up for success in the new organization?
Maybe I'll touch on a couple of things, right? If you're going through due diligence and you're part of those conversations, it's the obvious, get your ducks in a row, right? Just be prepared, almost like mentally be prepared that your business will be picked apart, right? And they're going to ask questions like, okay, I see you're performing well now, but really, is it really predictable? Nothing's personal. They're just trying to understand and basically value your business um, correctly. And so predictability, like you can show results, but show, why you think it's predictable, right? Just being able to show that is huge, right? That's what drives up valuations. So examples, right, of questions that, I felt, you know, the first couple of times going through, I was like, oh my God, it's so pointed. And, I almost took it personally because you work so hard at a startup and you're like, I'm working hard. I got these results. Like, trust me, they're great and it's always going to be this way. But they will
I
get
got this.
specific.
Don't
They're
worry.
like,
Just
okay,
yeah.
you deliver
The
this
the I yeah.
only in one quarter or only in 2 quarters, sometimes only a year. Prove to me or tell me what's indicative of this being the next few quarters, right? Is this just luck or is it just the market, right? So just be prepared for that type of ruling. And it's more a mental state that you have to get in so that you're not, because I've also seen acquisitions fall apart because founders or some of the executive decision makers are like, oh, I didn't like how that went, and they don't understand our value. So it's balancing, right? Like all of that. Specifically as an employee, I think regardless of functions, it's really having an open mindset. Um, and because when I was at SAP, for example, we had to acquire business objects, um, you know, I saw firsthand the folks that chose to see it as an opportunity, and usually an opportunity for their career. You have a lot more resources, right? You do have to figure out communication, meaning you're not just communicating to your immediate team, it's also the parent company. So double down on communications, almost, like over communicate. You're going to feel like you're over communicating because the parent company usually is so much larger, right? So it's harder to get your messages across, but it really can be a career opportunity, um, if you choose to, seize a day and make it that. You have a lot more resources, you have a lot more support, and you can probably get some amazing results because of that. Oh, and usually your advantage is you're the newly acquired company, and that's where all of the attention goes. It's like, "Oh my gosh, we just acquired X company," and, it's exciting.
Great advice. I'm hearing seize the attention while you have it. You might not have it forever. So um, then, look at it as a true opportunity. Double communications, maybe even triple communications for the first little bit. Make sure, you're showcasing everything, and then, really underscore predictability and why past results are going to indicate future results, back that up with data. And then always good advice for just about anything in business, which is don't take it personally. These hard questions, the fact of picking apart your business, don't take it personally. I think we could all, I need that on like my forehead, I think, for to remind me every day. Um, I like it. All right. Well, Katrina, this has been awesome. I have two more questions as we sort of wrap up the conversation, and just thoroughly enjoyed chatting with you today. First question is, what is one widely held belief that revenue leaders or founders have today that you think is bullshit or no longer serving us?
I have talked a lot already about this, but, this notion of firing fast, it almost feels like there's no accountability for the hiring manager as well. Right now, across some GTM functions, um, that is very warranted for sure because it's so clear the performance and it's very transactional when it comes to performance. But I still think it's about instilling a learning culture if you're an exec, right? So that you don't have to restart, right? Get everyone learning and just give it a little bit more of a runway than the let's fire fast. But I do see that a lot and I don't personally subscribe to it. Like an example right now, when I speak to companies of all sizes, I hear we figured out PLG, and that's great. That's probably for the lower end of the market. And we are now a multi-product um, company. It's more of a platform play. We now need to do sales assisted, selling to the enterprise. Does that mean you wipe out half of your company and rehire? That would be way slower, right? So maybe the nugget here is early on at a startup, hire really smart people that can solve problems. And then you're going to be able to kind of point them in different directions and to give them new problems to solve. And frankly, if you look at my career and my resume, it doesn't quite always make sense. But if you ask me, then I'll start making sense because I'm like, oh, here are all the things and how all the connections work. But the net of it was I was given so many opportunities to solve new problems. I've changed functions a number of times. And I think that's what fulfillment in your career means, right? You can solve different problems. So, as managers, as leaders, let's not box really smart talent, which, the valley is just so full of, and now beyond. into they just do this one role, and when it's not a fit, that's it. I think that's what's slowing down businesses, honestly.
Yeah. I would agree. I would agree. And I think, the accountability piece is missing. And it's almost so far in the other direction that I've seen leaders almost get rewarded for that, for being somewhat ruthless in their actions of like, no, we just hire, we demand excellence, we fire, demand excellence, and if you don't cut it, you don't cut it. Whereas I think you hired that person, you signed off on that hire, so that should be a leadership KPI that is front and center of like, okay, well, you had to let go X amount of people, and they were only there for 6 9 months, so you didn't set them up for success. You didn't hire the right person. So I think that's big. And I loved your note on fulfillment. I have a simple life motto that is, I want to spend my life solving interesting problems with interesting people. And I think if
I
you're
love
lucky enough
Scott.
to do that,
Oh my gosh. I love that. I love
thank
that.
you. Thank you. Yeah, it's a simple one, but I think if you're lucky enough to be in a position to do that, and I think we all are, if we let ourselves get there, that's how you can find a lot of joy in your work. Last question. It's tough out there. Everyone is trying a lot of different experiments. A lot of the old playbook is kind of breaking down. What is one tactic or strategy that is working for you right now, or working at some of the companies that you're advising?
Uh, I think marketing sometimes falls into a trap of not being very specific, more jargon. You only have so uh, much room on your website or your ad copy or even emails to communicate something. So as a result, right, the temptation to just kind of be big picture and, all of which is important, but there's a time and place for it. So what's been working for us and what I've also seen for a lot of the companies I'm talking to is just going a little deeper, right, with our messages. I think, and I've started seeing this like the last couple of years, so it's not that new, but getting the use, to the use case level and being very specific to the persona and sometimes even down to the job title is working. So, for example, take selling to marketers, right? Like a use case, like a very specific use case for a CMO uh, is going to look very different from, the end user practitioner who's a growth marketer, for example. So just really getting that specific when you do your marketing and your campaigns has been working for us. What it really boils down to is just having a lot of clarity on the altitude of your message, you know, versus like, oh, I'm just going to send, you know, everyone with marketing title this one thing and not really have it land. The other thing that is working, and I think it took a couple years for it to kind of truly be working, but I feel like, it's been around for a bit, but it seems to be working as of late. And maybe because during a downturn is actually a lot more competitive and there's a lot more noise, right? It's ABM. That can mean a lot of different things. Is it digital ABM? Is it very tailored, you know, white glove service programs, but whatever it is, and we do a variety. We subscribe to the one-to-one, one-to-many, and one-to-few, and we do a combination of digital as well as, very human-based programs. We're not making it hard for the audience to understand what's in it for them, right? And we do it down, by industry, by account, because when budgets are slim and it's competitive and there's a lot more marketing noise because everyone's just trying to, bring in more business, you have to make it easy for your audience by making it super relevant for them. And you kind of have just a little bit, right, to get them there. I call it the value exchange, right? For the time that they're spending to understand what you're trying to communicate, what are they getting in return? So some of the ABM tactics like, hey, we will do a free, audit of your data strategy, making that up. That's the value that they're going to get out of that based on the time that they're going to spend with you feels good and it feels right? Versus a generic email that kind of comes through about a generic topic and the webinar is also generic. You're that's what the market is seeing a lot of, right? And so you have to break through the noise.
Yeah. I think the first tactic and the strategy, ABM strategy, and the hyper specific messaging, they kind of go hand in hand too. And we're also in this beautiful time period in marketing where we have more and more intense signals and data than we ever had before. So even that hyper specific messaging, you don't have to be married to only that one. You can have like dynamic specific messaging that might change per persona in real time. Companies like Mutiny and others focused on this.
Think about AI and the possibilities of that, right? Like with generative AI. So the ease of, doing that education, creating content, um, I'm very excited for, our collective AI future, but it'll make it even easier to do, to add value, frankly, to be very specific and add value.
Absolutely. And of course, we got to the generative AI topic. Thank goodness it was at the end and not at the beginning, or we would have got completely sidetracked because it is fascinating to talk about and maybe a conversation for another day. But Katrina, thank you so much for the time. That was fantastic. And for folks that want to follow along on your journey, what's the best place to connect with you?
I think on LinkedIn, I'm probably the most active on LinkedIn. It's just Katrina Wong. I think the URL is like Katrina Wong 11, which is my birthday, June 11th. So I almost feel like Taylor Swift. Her numbers, her favorite number is 13. I'm like, my favorite number is 11 because it's my birthday. So yeah, so the URL, Katrina Wong 11. But yes, I look forward to connecting with everyone. And if you have questions, just DM me and I will try to get to as many as I can. Thanks for having me, Scott. This was truly a pleasure.
Of course. We'll have to have you back sometime in the future. And also a big fan of the number 11. That was actually my soccer jersey number back in the day. So amazing. And for all the listeners who joined us, thank you so much for hanging out with us. I always say it, but listening is one thing, executing is totally different. Hopefully, you can apply some of these learnings and tactics that we talked about today and help grow your business. And we will see you all next week.